Have you ever had the feeling that you are living a correct life, but not a true life? As if you were fulfilling what is expected of you, doing what seems right, and yet still feeling a silent emptiness, a restlessness without a name. As if something inside you were trying to call your attention, but you learned to ignore it. Perhaps there is an impulse you repress, a rage you do not admit, a desire you consider improper, an intensity you try to hide even from yourself. And the more you try to seem adjusted, the more you feel that something essential is missing, as if your own soul were living behind a carefully constructed mask. Carl Jung said that the greatest human mistake is to run from these parts, because what you repress does not disappear, it does not die. It only descends into the unconscious, where it continues operating in silence. And slowly, what you tried to bury begins to shape your life from behind, like an invisible force that becomes destiny. What you call anxiety, self-sabotage, or lack of purpose is often just the shadow trying to be heard, a rejected fragment asking for integration. Jung believed that the unconscious always finds a way to express itself. And what you do not face consciously, life presents as repetition, conflict, and emptiness, because purpose, for Jung, is not something you find outside. It is not in achievements, status, or approval. It is not in chasing a perfect identity. It is in becoming whole, in stopping living divided, in recognizing that you are not only the persona you show to the world, but also everything that remained hidden in the dark. There is an essential part of the psyche that almost no one wants to face: the shadow. The shadow is everything you learn to hide in order to be accepted. Inconvenient emotions, repressed desires, impulses you judge dangerous, but also forgotten talents, dormant strengths, aspects of you that were silenced too early. Jung saw the shadow not as an enemy, but as a map, an inner territory where the life you did not live is stored. And when you begin to look at this hidden side, something reorganizes. You realize that darkness is not only destruction, it can be raw material, it can be direction. In this video, you will understand how facing this hidden side can reveal exactly what you were born to be. Because purpose does not arise when you become someone new. It arises when you recover the parts of yourself that were abandoned. And perhaps, in the end, what you fear most within you is precisely the portal. Imagine for a moment that the most important part of your purpose is not in what you show to the world, but in what you hide. What you try to suffocate, deny, or keep silent. Carl Jung said that the shadow is precisely this: the inner place where the versions of you that you are afraid to face reside. The shadow does not come from nowhere. It forms the moment you learn early on that some parts of you are acceptable and others are not. You notice which emotions receive approval and which generate rejection. And without realizing it, you begin to build a mask, a social persona carefully shaped to be accepted. But what you repress does not disappear. Jung insisted on this firmly. The unconscious is not a cemetery, it is a living reservoir. Everything you bury continues breathing beneath the surface, and the more you try to appear only as light, the more the shadow gains density within you. Think about it. How many times have you felt something that did not match the image you try to sustain? A strange impulse, a sudden rage, a sadness without a name. These eruptions are not random defects. Often they are signs of something repressed trying to emerge, as if your soul were saying, "I am still here." The persona is comfortable because it protects. It gives you a role, a place, a social identity, but it also demands a silent price. Everything that does not fit into this character is pushed into the dark, and the shadow becomes exactly that. The person you could have been, but decided not to be in order to keep belonging. Jung said that the shadow is what you do not want to be. Not because it is necessarily evil, but because it is uncomfortable. Perhaps it is your vulnerability, perhaps your ambition, perhaps your rage, perhaps your intensity. The problem is that what you reject in yourself does not cease to exist. It only begins to act in hiding. That is why the shadow appears in unexpected moments, in dreams that seem too strange, in insecurities that make no sense, in repeated self-sabotage, in patterns you swear you want to change, but that return like an echo. The shadow is what was exiled, but it never stopped being part of you. And here, there is an uncomfortable truth. Many people spend their entire lives trying to find purpose while fleeing from their own shadow. They want a luminous mission, but they do not want to pass through what is dark within them. But Jung reminds us that psychological gold is not on the surface. It is underground. The first step to discovering who you are is not becoming someone new. It is stopping running from what you already are. Ask yourself, what part of me have I been trying to hide even from myself? What emotions do I consider unacceptable? What desires have I buried out of fear? These questions are not a threat, they are a map. Every real purpose requires wholeness, and wholeness means including what you would rather not carry. The shadow is not an enemy, it is a rejected fragment trying to return home. And the sooner you understand this, the sooner you stop living as a half, as an edited version of yourself. There is something deeply liberating in recognizing the shadow, because in the instant you stop fighting it, you begin to listen to it. And what seemed like mere fear begins to reveal meaning. Discomfort becomes a message. Pain becomes direction. As if what you avoided your whole life was exactly the portal. And perhaps the most curious thing is that the shadow rarely reveals itself only within you. It often appears outside, disguised in the people who irritate you, in the behaviors that provoke you, in the exaggerated reactions that arise without warning, as if the world were reflecting something you have not yet had the courage to recognize. There is a strange place where the shadow reveals itself with greater force, not within you, but outside. Carl Jung said that many times we do not perceive our hidden side directly. We find it in others, in people who awaken intense reactions, as if the world were a psychological mirror, reflecting parts of you that you have not yet owned. Think about it. Why do certain attitudes irritate you so much? Why do some people seem to touch an invisible nerve? Jung stated that everything that irritates us in others can lead us to self-knowledge. It is not only about them, it is about what they activate in you. Exaggerated emotion is almost always a clue. The shadow manifests through projection. What you do not accept in yourself, you begin to see with brutal clarity in others. You condemn outside what you did not have the courage to look at within. And the curious thing is that projection is not conscious. It is automatic. An ancient mechanism trying to protect your inner image. Perhaps you despise someone arrogant, but deep down you repressed your own confidence. Perhaps you criticize those who expose themselves because you learned to hide your voice. Perhaps you feel anger toward those who seem free because your shadow carries desires you considered improper. Projection is like a map. It marks the place of what was buried. Jung saw this as an invitation. Every irritation is a door. Every judgment is a mirror. When you react with intensity, ask, what exactly is bothering me? What does this awaken in me? Because often the discomfort does not come from the other. It comes from the silent recognition of something that lives in you as well. And here is the paradox. The shadow does not hold only weaknesses. It also holds potentials. There are people who repress their creativity, their strength, their ambition, their sensitivity, and then they feel envy or contempt toward those who express these qualities, as if life were saying, this could also be yours if you allowed it. How many dreams have you abandoned because they seemed too big? How many parts of you were silenced so as not to disturb? The shadow forms not only from what is wrong, but from what is too intense for the world to accept. And what you repress out of fear may be exactly the energy that carries your hidden purpose. Notice how certain people seem to provoke something visceral. It is not rational, it is almost instinctive. Jung would say that unconscious material is emerging there. The other becomes a symbol, a screen onto which your psyche projects what you have not yet integrated. The outer world becomes inner language, and you begin to be called inward. This changes everything, because suddenly you stop seeing the world as an enemy and begin to see it as a teacher. Every emotional discomfort becomes a message. Every conflict reveals something hidden, not for you to blame yourself, but for you to know yourself. The shadow does not want to destroy you. It wants to be recognized. And when you recognize it, something reorganizes. You stop wasting energy judging, attacking, avoiding. You begin to recover parts of yourself that were trapped in the unconscious. Anger becomes clarity, envy becomes direction, contempt becomes a question. As if emotions were compasses pointing toward a forgotten inner territory. Jung believed that purpose is not something you find only outside, in goals or achievements. It is born when you become whole, and the shadow is the missing part. Many times your calling is hidden precisely where you felt shame, where you diminished yourself, where you forbade yourself to exist fully. Perhaps what you criticize most is what you most need to integrate. Perhaps the trait you reject is the trait that would free you. Because the shadow is not only darkness, it is raw material. It is brute force. And when you stop projecting it, you begin to transform it into conscious power. The world then ceases to be merely scenery. It becomes a mirror. People cease to be only irritation or admiration. They become signs. And you begin to realize that your whole life has been trying to show you something, not through comfort, but through friction. Not through approval, but through emotional tension. And when you finally gather these projections back, when you stop seeking the culprit outside and begin to bring inward what was lost, something new happens. The shadow ceases to be a hidden enemy and becomes an integrated part of your path, as if life were preparing you to become whole, truly. There comes a moment in life when running no longer works. You can build masks, avoid certain feelings, control your image. But something inside you keeps calling. Jung called this call individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Not a socially acceptable version, but a whole being without inner division. Individuation is not perfection. It is not becoming enlightened or free of flaws. It is something deeper. It is integration. It is bringing into consciousness what was in the dark. Because for Jung, the real danger is not having a shadow. It is being ruled by it without knowing. The unconscious always directs what is not recognized. Think about it. How many times have you reacted in a way you did not even understand afterward? How many times have you repeated patterns you swore you would not repeat? Jung would say this happens when the shadow operates as an autonomous force. It acts from behind. It decides for you. And individuation begins when you say, I want to see what is moving me. Integrating the shadow is like turning on a light in a room that has been locked for years. At first, you do not like what you see. There is dust, pain, impulses, memories. But there is also something precious. Parts of you that were trapped there. The shadow is not only monstrous, it is also the place where your unlived life was stored. Jung said that no one becomes conscious by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is individuation. It is stopping pretending that you are only what you show. It is admitting your contradictions, your rage and your tenderness, your fear and your courage. Because the human soul is not pure, it is whole. And the strangest thing is that when you integrate the shadow, you do not become worse. You become more real. You stop projecting. You stop blaming. You stop being frightened by human emotions. You gain depth, like a painting that finally accepts dark colors, and because of that gains contrast, strength, and truth. The integrated shadow becomes energy. What was once self-sabotage becomes direction. What was once anxiety becomes clarity. Because much of your exhaustion comes from the effort of keeping parts of yourself hidden. Jung saw this as a silent inner war. And individuation is peace, not because everything disappears, but because nothing needs to be denied anymore. There is a question that marks this path. Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I without the role I learned to play? Jung said that the persona is necessary but dangerous when it becomes a prison. And individuation is exactly the moment when you cease to be only a mask and begin to be a complete human being. Integrating the shadow does not mean acting on every impulse. It means understanding. It means recognizing desire before it explodes, recognizing pain before it becomes destruction, recognizing rage before it becomes poison. The conscious shadow is not chaos. It is raw wisdom. And when you listen to it, it becomes a compass. And this is where purpose appears. Jung believed that the meaning of life is not something imposed from outside. It emerges from within when you align with your true self. Many times, what you call a mission is born exactly from what you suffered, repressed, feared. Your wound becomes a portal. Your conflict becomes direction. Perhaps you have spent years trying to be small in order to be accepted. Perhaps you hid your intensity so as not to frighten. Perhaps you repressed your creativity so as not to fail. But individuation is the opposite. It is recovery. It is saying, this is also me. And in that instant, your life begins to gain coherence. You no longer live fragmented. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But this requires courage, because being whole is risky. It is abandoning the illusion of control. It is accepting that within you there is light and shadow. But only when both coexist do you become authentic. And authenticity is the foundation of any real purpose. When you integrate your shadow, your relationships change. You stop seeking perfection in others. You stop being disappointed with humanity. You understand that everyone carries invisible conflicts. This generates compassion. And Jung believed that individuation does not heal only the individual. It heals the world because it reduces projections, hatred, and scapegoating. Imagine a society where more people face their own darkness instead of pouring it onto others, where fewer people needed enemies to justify inner pain. Jung saw the collective shadow as a source of war and division. Integrating the shadow is an intimate act, but also a spiritual one. It is a silent step toward a more conscious world. And perhaps the greatest revelation is this: the shadow was not trying to destroy you, it was trying to complete you. What you avoided was part of the path. What you feared was part of the map. Individuation is when you finally stop running and say, I am ready to be whole, whatever it takes. Because in the end, purpose is not a distant destination. It is a present integration. It is when your life ceases to be escape and becomes expression. When your pains become wisdom. When your shadow becomes conscious strength. And at that point, something inside you reorganizes. As if you were finally living not as a character, but as who you were born to be. Jung believed that most people live only halfway. One conscious part, carefully shaped for the world, and another part hidden deep down, repressed, silent, waiting. A persona to be accepted, and a shadow to be forgotten. But nothing in you can truly be erased. What is denied only becomes invisible. And that is why purpose is not born from the mask. It does not arise from trying to seem right, to be approved, to fit in. Purpose is born from integration, from the courage to stop running from yourself. Because what you avoid is not merely a flaw. Often it is an essential fragment of your truth trying to return. When you look at what you have repressed, you find more than faults. You find messages, you find energy. You find parts of yourself that were buried too early. Jung reminds us that the shadow is not only moral darkness, it is also forgotten potential, unlived life, raw force waiting for consciousness. Because there is no light without shadow, there is no depth without contrast. A human being who tries to be only good all the time becomes fragile, superficial, divided. True psychological maturity is born when you accept that contradictions coexist within you. And it is precisely this wholeness that creates authenticity, presence, and meaning. And perhaps the greatest relief is realizing that you do not need to destroy yourself in order to transform. You need to see yourself. You need to make conscious what was in the dark. Jung said that the unconscious directs your life until you recognize it. And then what seemed like blind destiny begins to become conscious choice. Self-knowledge is not only understanding your mind, it is recovering your soul. It is stopping projecting outward what is within. It is ceasing to fight against your own humanity. When you integrate your shadow, you become whole. And a whole life does not need to be perfect. It needs to be true. This is the path of individuation. Perhaps what you fear most to face is exactly what is trying to guide you. The rage you hide may be strength. The sadness you avoid may be depth. The desire you repressed may be a calling. The shadow is not an enemy waiting to destroy you. It is a compass waiting to be heard. So I leave you with a silent question. What part of you is asking for integration now? What has your shadow been trying to show through your patterns, emotions, and restlessness? If something here touched you, share it in the comments. Your reflection may be someone's first step, because this is not the end. It is the beginning of becoming whole.